I'm back. Unfortunately for you, here to introduce to you our last speaker of the day. His name is Dmitri Pivovarov, and he is the principal product manager at Bolt, the company formerly known at Taxify. As Taxify, he's going to talk to us about uh, how to get a good product on the market, from insights to product innovation. Thank you. Round of applause for Dmitry. Good luck, Dmitry. Thank you.
Okay, so technology in practice. I will take some time to do the technical setup here. Okay, I hope it's working. No, it's not. Okay. Okay, now it's live. Great. So I hope you're feeling excited and inspired by all the ideas from today's talks. Who is actually going home with some ideas they want to maybe implement later, or who got excited from the presentations today? Okay, let's go. So I wanted to make my talk a little bit more practical, and so that you can actually know how to implement those ideas in a kind of a lean and efficient way. Because this is kind of how we approach innovation at Taxify. Sorry, I keep slipping. It's Bolt now, at Bolt. And the key for us is to actually be very efficient with that. So I'll share a few examples of how we actually implemented some solutions. And hopefully you'll find it useful, and it will be something that you can maybe apply in your company. But let me begin with how Taxify started. So like most of the startups, it started with the problems that founders actually faced in their real life. And in Tallinn, specifically, it was the taxis. And taxis in Tallinn were notorious for being bad at everything. They had old cars, smelly cars, very rude drivers. It was hard to get a car. You had to call a dispatcher. They would connect you to the car. You would have to wait for some unknown time. And this was the problem, and the founders decided to solve it. So they developed an app where you can just tap to get a taxi, and you can rate the driver after the ride. So that addressed all the problems, basically, because you didn't have to talk to the dispatcher, and you didn't have to ride with poor quality drivers because they were filtered out of the system based on bad reviews. So this approach of taking the real problems and solving them, it's still with us. So we still do things the same way. The only difference is that when the company grew, the scale of the problems also grew. And currently, there are three main problems that we're trying to fix. And the first one is just the commute itself, right? So in EMEA alone, people spend more than 30 minutes a day traveling to work. And since we're talking about personal cars, most of that time is unproductive because you sit behind the wheel. Secondly, related to that is the problem with parking spaces. So each personal car needs two parking spaces, actually. One where you live and another one where you commute to. And finally, not the least one, is the emission from all the traffic and all the cars. So those are three big problems, and this is actually what led us to launch electric scooters in some of the cities. In fact, Bolt was the first company who launched electric scooters because actually they address all three problems, right? They help with the traffic and the commute, they get rid of parking spaces, and they don't have any emissions. Has anyone actually tried electric scooters? I would say like 10% people. Okay, I suggest you try them. It's really fun to ride. It's a cool experience. And this is where we are actually now. So we have more than 25 million passengers. We're operating in more than 30 countries. And all that started from this tiny country, which is actually barely visible on the map even. And the key to our expansion and quick growth is actually that we don't have a lot of overhead. Currently, we have around 900 people working at Bolt. And if you look at our competitors, some of the biggest ones have 20,000 people working for them, right? So all that efficiency, we pass it on to our riders and our drivers, because we can afford a smaller commission, and everyone wins in the end. And that helps us expand. But how do we do this? How do we keep doing this, right? So at the core, we have a very simple innovation process, which is not new. And it has 3 components. You understand the problem, you figure out a solution for it, and then you validate if that solution works. In the lean methodology, it's called learn, build, and measure, pretty much the same 3 things, just different terms. And let me illustrate this concept with an example. So what you see here is data, right? We're a data-driven company. We collect all sorts of metrics about our users, about our apps. And what you see here is the distribution of time, how drivers spend it. So the red bar is the driver going to the client, the gray bar is waiting for the client, and the green bar is driving with the client. And this is different cities. So naturally, we want to have the green bar as long as possible and everything else as short as possible. And we decided to address the gray bar, which is drivers waiting for the clients. And the reason the way, there is twofold, of course. One is riders are not rushing to get to a taxi, and another reason is they can't find it. And this especially happens in some cities, like in Africa, for example. They have street names and then they have house numbers. So it's really difficult to find where to park the car to meet the rider. Or even if you rely on the GPS location, the rider can order the car from within the building, and it's not clear for the driver where exactly around that building to meet the rider. So naturally, we came to the idea that, okay, let's suggest our riders and drivers where they should meet. Let's just put a specific points on the map, and they will meet there. And there were 2 options to solve this. One was the manual option, to pretty much create all the pickup points, and another one was to create some kind of a solution based on our data. Of course, we quickly dismissed the first solution and designed a solution which simply aggregated the historical pickup points and suggested them on the map. It looks somewhat like this. So you would order a taxi, and we would show a few points where you could actually go to pick up the taxi. And of course, we tested it. We had 2 treatment groups to which we released the functionality, and then we had the control group, which didn't have any changes in the app, and we compared a few metrics between them. And the 2 important ones we looked at is the search and finish ratio, which basically tells you how many orders finish from the user opening the app. And the second one is the wait duration. So the interesting thing here is that somewhat we saw improvements, but if you look at this p-value row, it basically tells you how reliable that metric is. So if this p-value is more than 5%, the results are pretty much random, and you can't really trust them. And on top of that, we haven't considered the user value or the user experience, right? We only looked at data, but there's another important aspect. And the thing there was that actually we forced people to walk a bit more to the pickup point. And there is also bias. For example, if you're living next to some popular place, like a club or a bar, naturally there will be more pickups from there, and we would suggest you a pickup point next to the bar, which is not convenient for you personally. So since there is no value, there is no improvement in user experience, of course we didn't release this. And that took us back to this diagram, and basically the problem stayed the same, but we had to take another round to finding a better solution that we can test. And it turned out that instead of having one generic solution that works, we had to come up with multiple solutions which work better in each case. So we had to actually do the manual solution, and it is actually scalable because there are some areas in each city which are restricted for cars to access. Like, for example, airport, you cannot just drive on the runway and pick up a passenger. You have to wait in a designated zone. And you can do this all manually. And for the automated suggestions, we made them personal. So we only suggest you the pickup points which are from your history. So you wouldn't be sent to a bar which has no relevance for you. And we also suggest some generic points if they have better ETA, meaning the pickup time is shorter. And this actually happens a lot in older cities where you have a lot of one-way streets. If the driver just passed you, you could walk maybe 25 meters to catch him, instead of him going around a few blocks to go back to you. So if we map this to the high-level diagram, how we approach innovation, we had a problem. It was unproductive wait time that we wanted to minimize. the solution was to suggest for drivers and riders to meet at the same place. And then we validated it with the A/B test. And you need to understand that you have to probably do it a few times before to reach the working solution. So it's okay to actually fail. You have to expect that. But now let's actually drill down into more detailed view of this process to understand how we can make it actually lean and efficient, right? So we don't spend a lot of resources doing things that we shouldn't be doing. And actually, one side note about the process is that, especially like in startup community, this is something that is frowned upon, right? Because it's perceived as an overhead. Why would you want to have a process if you can just do things, right? And it works actually pretty fine when the startup is small. You just have like a very burning needs that you have to address. But once you scale, you just have too many things to do, and you have to be super careful about what you do, what you spend your resources on. And process actually helps you there. And on top of that, when you scale, you hire people. And the problem with people is that they have different output, right? So process here again helps them achieve more or less consistent output because they follow the same steps for prioritization. So nobody's wasting time on unnecessary things. And for us, it looks like this. So we have 6 steps actually from the initial insight or the idea until we release it fully to our users. And as you can see, there are trash cans next to every step. So at each step, we actually filter out a lot of things that we don't want to move to the next step. And this is the key to being actually efficient for us because we don't spend resources on doing something that is not productive. So let's actually go through all the steps. And I have another example of the project I was recently involved in. And we'll see how it actually works in practice. And the first step is to understand if you want to take the idea or some insight you have from data, and if you want to take it actually forward without spending too much time on the research. And is that even possible? Turns out that yes, it is quite possible because a lot of ideas are pretty stupid, and you can understand that pretty easily. And a good indicator of something to instantly disqualify is add a pop-up to do something, right? So somehow most of the ideas we receive turn to be like a pop-up is a solution for everything. Instead, we're looking for problems, not so much the ideas or the insights, but we're actually looking for something that's a big problem for us. And in this case, it's an IoT module. So this is the black box on the scooter, which actually controls the scooter remotely. So you can unlock the scooter, you can lock it, you can get all sorts of metrics from it, and you can find it. Since we were very eager to launch scooters first, we had to buy this device from an external company. And there were a lot of problems when you do that. First of all, it's expensive. Secondly, you don't have any control over the features. You can ask for them, but not necessarily they will deliver. And thirdly, the biggest problem for us was that we were bottlenecking on the modules. So we had scooters, we had the team, we had the warehouse, we had the software, but we didn't have enough modules to put the scooters on the streets. And this is the kind of idea that we want to solve, right? It's a big problem. So it goes to the next step, basically, which is the backlog. And backlog is where product managers actually spend most of their time. This is where they do the research, they analyze the costs, and decide whether we should even spend time on the solution. And at this stage, we can actually discard the idea if we understand that the value is not there, or the other impact in terms of metrics is not there, or if we understand that the return on investment is low, meaning the cost is too high. But the caveat is that actually you shouldn't only look at ROI, because that will tend to focus you on quick wins and ideas that are cheap, right? But sometimes things that give you a strategic advantage, they cost a lot. And the ROI for them can be a bit lower, actually. And this is actually a very good example of that, because to make an IoT module yourself, that's like a huge amount of work. First, you have to design the board with all the components on it. Then you have to integrate that board with the scooter. And all different scooters have different protocols, so that's again a lot of work. On top of that, there are physical aspects. You have to design the casing and make it actually work with the specific scooter model. And finally, the whole other story is the production, which usually takes place in China and takes a lot of resources to coordinate. So the cost was high, and we needed to understand it. And the most curious thing about it that we had no experience in hardware whatsoever. So what we did in the product team, we actually went out and had interviews with 5 different companies who we wanted to partner with to create this IoT. And basically, we built our understanding from zero to somewhat good level in a couple of weeks by just talking and interviewing a lot of people. And the estimates from 3 out of 5 companies were pretty much actually similar, right? So it indicated to us that they actually understand what they're talking about, whereas the other 2 had no idea how to implement this thing. So we had to choose one of the 3, and we actually went with the one that had least experience, but they were the most passionate to deliver and work with us. And turned out it was a good decision, because otherwise I wouldn't have had this example right now. We would still be implementing it somewhere. In any case, to sum this up, at the backlog stage, you want to research, you want to understand the problem and what it costs you to solve it. And if the cost is too high or the value is not there, you just discard it and take the next thing that you want to work on. Now, if you move to roadmap, this is where you actually work on the solution with the engineering team, with the design team. And here the kickbacks can also happen, of course. And in most cases, it happens because you underestimate the cost. This is a very typical thing in technology. You think it's simpler, you start digging into the solution, and you understand, oh, well, it's 2 times more expensive. So for us, for the IoT module, the actual goal for us was to do it as quickly as possible because we were bottlenecking on those, right? So we wanted to make it as simple as possible, and we cut out a lot of features which the competitor modules had. But we also added features which we know better from experience, because we actually run operations ourselves, are important. And the case is the speaker. So none of the modules had speakers. And ours, we actually spent a lot of time designing for the speaker. And this is because it's helpful in the 2 cases. When we collect scooters, we do it usually at night, so it's dark, and scooters are usually hidden in the bushes for some unknown reason. And when we alarm them, the person who is collecting the scooters can easily find them. And the second thing is that when the scooter is on the street and someone wants to throw it in the river, it starts screaming very loudly and people start paying attention. So it helps. And actually, note what we do here is like the whole process is designed to filter out all the unnecessary work, things that we don't want to do. And even within the steps itself, we're again filtering out all the unnecessary features that we don't want to implement. So we have 2 layers of prioritization. One on the process level, another one on the feature level. And ideally, once you create a spec, you move to the next step, which is the implementation. And of course, as always, things can be discarded at this step too. Usually it's because we have some other priorities which are urgent, they just come up and we have to put the current project on hold. Or sometimes it happens that the features become irrelevant. And usually this happens due to some market conditions or regulation changes. We were working on a thing and then regulation changes and it's no longer needed. So that happens too. As far as the IoT module product, the execution was mostly about prototyping, building, testing, and doing lots and lots of iterations on that. So for example, we tested the GPS accuracy. We built different boards. We had different combinations of the antennas and the GPS units. And we tested them on bicycles, on cars, until we had a reasonable solution that we liked with GPS accuracy. Another example is the casing. It actually also took a lot of iterations, a lot of failed attempts to make it, because it has to have good acoustics for the speaker, and at the same time, it has to have good water and dust protection. And also, my favorite test was the vandalism protection. So yes, this one was a failed casing. All right, so the idea of the implementation stage is to actually deliver something that you can test on the next stage, something you can put in front of the users or maybe in front of the customers and validate if it's actually bringing value or if it's useful. And at the validation stage, we actually do exactly that. We test if there is value. And of course, here, after all the work, some ideas have to be discarded. One of the examples was the previous case study where we had those smart pickups, right? You remember that the first iteration didn't succeed. And we had to go all over. Well, actually, it took us 4 iterations. I just shortened it a bit until we got to the reasonable solution. As far as the scooter modules, the value was there, of course, because we made them cheaper, we made them simpler, and we had control over all the functionality, all the features, and production. So the only test we needed to do is to validate that this device works at scale, it works on the street, and it has no glitches. So we did all that, and actually, what's interesting, on top of that, we found that the speaker actually helps a lot. So we had a lot more retention with the scooters on which we installed this module, because it was easier to find. To sum up, so for the validation state, you just verify the value is there. If there is no value, or if it's just marginal, don't ship, because supporting of the features costs more than actually value if it's very marginal. And finally, this takes us to the end of the journey for the idea or the insight. If there's value, you ship it, and everyone is happy. But the interesting perspective here is that if I take this whole funnel or the flow and scale it to the number of items in each step, it would look something like this. So there's a huge amount of items at each step that we discard, and very few ideas actually make it to the end of the funnel. So with that, we actually made it to the end of the talk as well, and some takeaways that I want to share with you, hopefully that you'll find them useful. The first one sounds like a cliche actually, and the second one too, but they are cliches for the simple reason that they work, right? If you don't solve real problems, you bring in no value. Same with the experiments are failing. Again, this was told millions of times, but this is very important to have a mindset like this, because otherwise if you fail, you might get despaired, but you shouldn't be, because this is how innovation works. You're doing something you don't know. Data, nowadays it's very popular to be data-driven. Everyone wants to make decisions on data, but the important thing there is that if those decisions affect users, don't forget about the user experience aspect as well. The fourth one is prioritization. Again, this is the key for us to our efficient innovation. We only work on things we're certain about that will bring value. And finally, if you're doing something that you know, this is probably not innovation, right? So take challenges, because this is actually what it takes to innovate. Thank you.
Thank you, Dmitri. We actually have some questions for you.
That's good.
Okay, I'm going to try. Okay, maybe just one.
Do I need to unplug this?
Sorry?
Do I need to unplug it so people would see questions? Or?
Yeah, but I can read them out loud.
Let's try it.
I think we should be fine now. Okay, I'm just gonna read them. So I think you know what's going on in Romania, and you're here, so you're gonna have to deal with this. What was the impact of the current laws that regulated ride-sharing platforms in Romania? I know you handle the product, not the legislation, not the marketing.
You know what's the worst thing? What? Our PR team actually told me about this, and they told me to read a huge document, and I didn't. So I don't have an answer, unfortunately.
Okay, it's okay. I tried. Okay. Well, why do you think there is stronger resistance from the traditional taxi industry to car sharing versus the accommodation industry to Airbnb disruptive approach? This handles product a bit, right?
Yeah. So well, the resistance is obvious, right? Because we're cutting into their revenue. We're doing things more efficiently. That means we can lower the prices, and of course, people don't like it, especially in countries where it's heavily regulated, where you have to maybe buy a license, a taxi license for a lot of money, and then we come and we do the same thing without any licenses, without having people to spend money. So it's easier for them to start earning money with us, with Bolt, right? So naturally, you'll get a lot of pushback.
It makes sense. I actually have a question for you. So Bolt has gone from an all software company, an all software startup, to an all hardware, not all hardware, also hardware startup with the scooters. What was difficult about that from your perspective as a product manager, and how? What would be an advice you would give to startups planning to do hardware? here in Romania and in Europe in general?
That's an interesting question. So the biggest difference for me, since I come from the software background, was that things are now physical and there's actually wait times. So you can't just implement something and see the results instantly. You actually have to wait for that speaker to come from China for a couple of weeks before you test it. And then it's a bad speaker, you order 10 more, and maybe one of them works. So it's actually, like in hardware, it takes a lot more time and effort to come to the solution and to test things simply because they're physical. Oh, the advice though, so that's a trickier one. I mean, we worked with the partner, so if you're planning to do hardware not yourself in-house, spend a lot of time and effort to understanding who your partner is, right? Because some of them might seem like they have an idea of what they're doing, but they don't. So like interview everyone you can find, get ideas from people, get their feedback, and that helps you choose the right maybe partner to work on your hardware. Yep.
Thank you very much, Dmitri. The rest of the questions are regulation-based, and as we both know, you cannot answer that. Another round of applause for Dmitri, everyone. Thank you very much.